Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. UFC 318 Poirier vs Holloway 3 takes place this Saturday, and in this video I want to go over the card in its entirety, starting with the first fight of the night, working our way up to the main event, giving a preview and my pick for every single fight on the card. And while this card might not be the best on paper, okay, in my opinion there are a lot of sleeper fights, especially on the undercard, which we will get to throughout the course of this video. But first guys, before we get into it, please allow me just 1 minute of your time to pay some bills, okay, and tell you about this video sponsor, my bookie. So as you guys already know, because you clicked on the video, UFC 318 takes place this Saturday for Dustin Poirier's final fight, and we're gonna find out if he can ride off into the sunset after beating Max Holloway for a third time throughout his career. Now, if any of you have watched my fight night live streams, you will know that I do enjoy to place some wagers from time to time, okay? And for a few different reasons, when I do bet on fights, I like to use my bookie. My bookie offers a great user interface and the option to place many different prop bets as well as live betting, which in my country at least is hard to come by. Head over to mybookie.website/joinwithronan50 and use promo code Ronan50. Newcomers will receive an additional 50% bonus of whatever you deposit, all the way up to $2,000. If you deposit $100, you get to play with 150. Deposit $1,000, play with 1,500. Okay, guys, that's a 50% ROI right out the gate. One more time, that's mybookie.website/joinwithronan50. Promo code Ronan50. Okay, don't miss out. Now back to the video. So let's get started with the first fight of the night, which is Carly Judice versus Nicole CALIARI. Okay, now I do not like picking big favorites in the women's divisions when both girls are very green in their careers like these two are. If we look at their recent records, you'll see Nicole CALIARI got a submission finish on the Contender Series and then lost in her UFC debut by split decision, whereas Carly Judice, the sizable favorite in this fight, lost 2 split decisions in a row on the Contender Series, yet got a head kick knockout in her UFC debut. So there's just a little bit of inconsistency in their performances, which makes it hard to pick. But I am going to be going with Carly Judice. I think she had a better performance in the actual UFC. She's quite a bit taller, quite a bit longer than Nicole CALIARI, potentially making it easier to land that head kick again. But also, if she doesn't get the finish, she could probably keep her at range and get it done like that via decision. But anyways, let's move on to the next fight, which is Bruno Ferreira versus Jackson McVeigh. Okay, so we've got a guy whose nickname is the Hulk and a guy who looks like a cross between Jesus and Kid Rock. Jason McVeigh making his UFC debut at 6-0, and despite the undefeated record, I'm gonna be going with Bruno Ferreira. Okay, Bruno Ferreira has fought much better competition and for the most part has been successful doing so. Also, he's used to fighting guys that are a lot taller and longer than him. At middleweight, he is one of the shorter middleweights for sure, and McVeigh will be about 6 inches taller with a 5-inch reach advantage over him, but Ferreira is extremely explosive and he uses that to close the distance fast, and he hits hard as well. Not to mention, if we look at McVeigh's record and the level of competition he's been facing, I'm not overly impressed. Okay, his last 3 opponents had a record of 4-1, 3-2, 7-13. We're talking about a combined losing record of 14-16. Okay, so I do think that this is going to be a pretty significant skill jump when he comes over to the UFC. So like I said, I'll be going with Bruno Ferreira. I like him by finish too, whether we see a club and sub scenario or just like a straight up knockout, but either way. Let's continue to the next fight, which is Ryan Spann versus Lucas BRZESKI. Okay, now I can never bring myself to pick Ryan Spann basically ever. Okay, he's extremely inconsistent, and whenever he loses, he claims that he wasn't training or didn't have a proper gym or proper coaching or whatever it may be. When he does win, he claims he's finally starting to take things serious, and then he just loses again, and it drives me nuts. Plus, in his last 5, his only win was OSP, and some of those losses in that last 5 have not aged very well at all, like Anthony Smith, for instance. Now, BRZESKI's record, on the other hand, is not much better, but fuck it. Let's move on to the next fight, which is Jimmy CRUTE versus Marcin PRACHNIO. Now, what's crazy to me, I didn't realize this, Jimmy Crute has not gotten a win since like 2020. And sometimes it's because he just doesn't quite do enough. Like in his last 5, he's got 2 draws in there. And then, of course, there was that injury loss to Anthony Smith. So, I mean, that record with just a few tweaks could look quite different. I also feel like sometimes he doesn't make the best decisions. And he doesn't try to do what he's best at. He'll stand with guys that he just does not need to be standing with. I have a feeling, though, he's really going to want to get the win here, okay? Maybe to preserve his career. He could potentially be cut. I'm kind of surprised he hasn't at this point. And Prachnio's been subbed in 2 of his last 3, both via arm triangle. So I think Crute's going to take him down. Heavy top pressure, a Kimura or something along those lines. But either way, let's continue up the card to Adam Fugitt versus Islam Dulatov. Now, I'm pretty hyped for this fight, not because of the fight itself, but to see what Islam Dulatov can do in the UFC. There has been quite a bit of hype around this guy since his first round knockout on the Contender Series. He's a very marketable individual, obviously. Okay, bro's a fucking Versace model. Adam Fugitt, whatever, is a guy I find the UFC uses to kind of be a stepping stone sometimes for someone that they're trying to build, right? Like we saw Michael Morales, Mike Malott, and now Islam Dulatov. And I don't mean that to be disparaging, but he's kind of like a prospect gatekeeper rather than a contender gatekeeper. So I'm going Dulatov by KO. We've seen Adam get hurt a few times in fights. Morales knocked him out. Mike Malott dropped him before submitting him. So I think that that's a safe bet. But either way, let's move up the card to Atiba Gautier versus Robert Valentin. Robert Valentin's last fight, man, holy shit, with Torres Finney. That fight was absolutely atrocious. Now, thankfully, I don't think that this one is going to look that way, but I will be picking Atiba Gautier, probably by knockout as well. He is absolutely massive, has like, I think he's like 6'4" with an 81-inch reach or something like that, almost exclusively knockouts, and Valentin has been knocked out a couple times. So I don't think he's going to be able to out-damage his opponent this time, because I did think he out-damaged Torres Finney. He just got controlled a lot, but his opponent this time around is going to be trying to do damage to him much the same. So I'm going to be going with Gautier by way of knockout, okay? Moving up the card to Francisco Prado versus Nikolai Veretennikov. This should be a very fun fight, I think. Both these guys take a shit ton of damage, okay, but also do their best to try to dish it out. Prado is extremely durable, and I do think that he should be able to get this one done. Since being in the UFC, he's fought some pretty tough competition. Now, he's not beaten them, but he's fought them. Jake Matthews, ZELLHUBER, Azaitar he did beat, I think, whereas Veretennikov has lost to both Austin Vanderfort and Danny Barlow, and he got finished in one of those, whereas Prado has never been finished a single time in his entire career. So I'm going to rely on his durability to get him through this one, okay? But let's continue up the card to Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. I have no idea how Marvin Vettori is still in the top 10, with all due respect, okay? And while neither guy has got, had a ton of success lately in their last couple, I'm still going with Brendan Allen, because I think his 2 recent losses are both to guys who are very, very good. Obviously, Nasruddin Imavov, good everywhere, right? Anthony Hernandez is a fucking monster, and I think that Hernandez was just a bad stylistic matchup for Brendan Allen. Allen's best aspect of his game is grappling. So, what was he supposed to do against Hernandez, who is an extremely good grappler, but also has the best cardio at middleweight, maybe? Do you know what I mean? So there's that. But I don't think that Marvin Vettori is really that good anywhere, especially not this stage in his career. And recently in his fights, he just looks more and more hittable, which I didn't even think was possible. Not to mention the difference in the level of activeness is insane, right? Brendan Allen has been active this whole time, fighting good competition and shit like that, whereas Marvin Vettori is borderline Paulo Costa levels of activity. We see him like once a year, twice, maybe that. So I'm going Brendan Allen, probably by decision. But either way, let's move up the card too. This is one of those sleeper fights. I was mentioning in the opening, okay, Kyler Phillips versus Vinicius Oliveira. I'm going to be going with Oliveira here. I'm not a massive believer in Kyler Phillips for some reason. I think sometimes he's flashy for like no fucking reason at all when it just doesn't make sense to be. And then other times he's just, you know, I don't know what he's doing. But he'll throw wheel kicks when he's nowhere in range. And it just reminds me of Michelle Watterson. And I'm surprised that he's not fucking ki-eyeing as he does it, okay? Now, I do think Vinicius Oliveira is very good. And when he throws crazy flashy shit, it actually works. I think his timing's very good. His shot selection's very good. I like that they're both younger. Also, like, we're not trying to save them till they're both ranked or some shit, or, you know, ranked in the top 10 or whatever. It's a fun prospect fight. Now, I don't know that either guy finds a finish, so I could see it going to a decision. Kyler Phillips has never been finished. He seems to be quite durable. Oliveira has a few times in his career, but they were years ago. I think 3 years ago was the most recent one. And he's clearly improved quite a bit since then. So, and he's also, since he's been in the UFC, he's fought some pretty dangerous guys that hit hard and not gotten put away. So I feel like he's maybe moved past that point in his career. So yeah, I'm going to be going with Vinicius Oliveira. But either way, let's move up the card to the pay-per-view opener, okay, which is Michael Johnson versus Daniel ZELLHUBER. I hate saying shit like this, but this one might as well be a lock for Daniel ZELLHUBER, and I know it's not a hot take, but this is absolutely an attempt from the UFC to give ZELLHUBER a kind of star-building performance, right? The opportunity for a nice highlight. Now, ZELLHUBER is coming off of that insane fight of the year, in my opinion, fight of the year, against Esteban Ribovics at, I believe it was UFC 306, which he did take a ton of damage in, but I think he's young enough that he's, you know, he's young enough in his career that that's not going to have an immediate impact. Like, I don't think we're going to see him come out and have no chin whatsoever. I think he's going to be very durable for years to come. Perhaps when he's older, he'll be drinking through a fucking straw or whatever. Now, Michael Johnson is on a 2-fight win streak and still has some power, clearly, right? Got a knockout in his last fight. But I just think he'll have a hard time dealing with the length and the variety of weapons that Daniel ZELLHUBER has to offer. Also, if I had to wager which one was more durable at this stage in both of their careers, obviously it would be Daniel ZELLHUBER. But either way, let's move up the card to Dan Ige versus Patricio Pitbull. I'm going with Dan Ige. I just think historically, not a lot of Bellator guys have had success once they actually get to the UFC, especially when they come towards the end of their career, the way that like Pitbull, Michael Chandler both have, late 30s, or, you know, Chandler was mid 30s, but still their best years behind them, right? They had lost their belts by the time they came over here in their respected organization, both Bellator. And of course, the competition level is just, you know, it's different. Okay, there's a lot of people who pretend to be hardcore fans that try to act as though, well, all these organizations are equal. The UFC just has better marketing or whatever. I don't fucking buy that at all, right? Bellator and PFL of today are not Strikeforce. It's not the same thing. They're not even remotely close. So I think that Dan Ige has probably fought tougher competition largely, and I think he's going to be difficult for Pitbull to deal with. If Pitbull wants to grapple, I don't know how well that's going to go for him. Dan Ige's got very good takedown defense. He's also good at not getting submitted, right? The Bryce Mitchell fight is a good example of that. Dan Ige also has a very good chin, and I think that we've seen him fight guys who probably hit harder than Pitbull and not get knocked out. So also, Ige hits hard as fuck himself, and I believe he's a little bit trickier in how he sets up his offense. So I could see him honestly knocking Pitbull out, especially considering Pitbull is, headed towards the end of his career. Okay, but either way, let's move up the card to Kevin Holland versus Daniel Rodriguez. I'm going with Kevin Holland for this one. Honestly, this is another one I'd be pretty confident calling a lock as well. D-Rod is almost 40. He hasn't looked that good as of late. His current win streak comes over two guys that are also older in their careers and have very clearly declined, right? Alex Morono and Ponzinibbio. Both guys have not looked great as of late. Not to mention, Kevin Holland has beaten some guys that I think are pretty good, right? And definitely better than Rodriguez. Now, Kevin Holland's last two wins are kind of in a similar boat to D-Rod's, but I don't think it's quite as extreme. Luque, obviously a bit older, longer in his career. Gunnar Nelson also, but, and, you know, very inactive. But I do still think that Kevin Holland's good enough to beat a guy like D-Rod. And at 170, he looks much better than he does at 85. Now, D-Rod has only been finished twice in his whole fucking career. Once by submission, once by knockout. And Holland almost exclusively wins by finish, so that aspect will be interesting to see. I could see him like rocking D-Rod and then latching up a sub, or honestly dropping him with the right hand and just finishing it off with a few shots. Ref stops it and calls it a day. But either way, let's move up the card to the co-main event. Paulo Costa versus Roman Kopylov. All right, now I'm going to be going with Roman Kopylov. Paulo Costa is just too goddamn inconsistent, okay? He's 1-3 in the last 5 fucking years. And his only win in that time was over Luke Rockhold, which that was Luke's last fight in the UFC. So he's super inconsistent. He can't really figure out how to deal with guys that are actually better than him on the feet, not just hit harder, right? But when there's an actual skill gap there, he doesn't know. It's like he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't really have the ability to wrestle all that much. And even if he does manage to get a hold of you, his jiu-jitsu is not super threatening either. And he has a really hard time closing the distance against guys who do understand range and striking a bit better than he does. And then he's not able to get inside and land his big hooks and shit like that, right? Because his offense is very simple. It's very basic. And against guys like Johnny Hendricks and, you know, dudes that are going to be there in front of you to hit, it works. But when you've got a guy like Sean Strickland who's very defensively sound, or Robert Whittaker who's always on the, you know, balls of his feet, hopping in and out of range, throwing in combination and things like that, it's trickier for him to deal with, and he can't seem to do it. And I do think that Roman Kopylov is going to be that good on the feet compared to Paulo Costa. He's got a very strong kicking game, so I think he's going to be able to keep Costa at bay, keep him long, and then Costa won't be able to get inside and close the distance and shit. I think he's going to beat the shit out of Costa's legs, beat the shit out of his body. I would imagine he'll land a head kick at some point. We've seen Whittaker land a head kick. We've seen Izzy land head kicks. Paulo Costa's been hit with head kicks. Now, he is, you know, historically a very hard guy to finish, but who knows at this stage with all the inconsistency rather, and also the fact that he's getting older. When he was young or younger, he could kind of get away with it, but at a certain point that does go away. So I don't know if Kopylov gets the knockout, but I just can't imagine Paulo Costa winning this one. But anyways, let's move up to the main event, okay? All right, Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. I'm still kind of torn on this one, if I'm being honest. I'm not quite sure who I'm gonna pick as of yet, so we'll just talk through it a little bit, okay? When this fight first got announced, I was extremely sure and confident that I was going to pick Dustin Poirier. And then I went back and watched their second fight with one another. And I didn't realize, I think, thinking about it, how young Max Holloway was until I recently rewatched it. And he looks a lot fucking different. He looks much slimmer, right? And also not in as good of shape even, because he had taken that fight on short notice. It was up a weight class, so he just didn't really cut weight. He just, you know, showed up as is, essentially. Whereas now he's kind of taken some time to bulk up and put on muscle and things like that. So I think he looks a lot more natural at lightweight now than he did back then. Also, I think that Max Holloway's improved more than Dustin Poirier. If I had to pick one who I think has improved more, I think it's Max Holloway. I think that Max Holloway has added more shit to his game than Dustin Poirier has. Dustin Poirier has always kind of been a bit limited in his offense. Now, he's very good with his hands, but because of his hips and things like that, he can't throw kicks very well. So he'll try to throw a round kick and it looks like a teep kick. Whereas Max Holloway has added like that hopping side kick to the leg, or at the very least he's gotten much more effective with it. His spinning back kick to the body, he's gotten much more effective with that as well, even when Justin Gaethje doesn't dip his head right into it. Also, Max Holloway has began to throw with a lot more power. Not all the time, but he mixes it in there, okay? And there's a few examples of that. The obvious ones, right? Korean Zombie, Justin Gaethje, whatever. But in the fight with Ilia Topuria, I believe it was round 2, there was a right hand that he landed that was loud as fuck. It's snappy. It makes Ilia's head, you know, his neck snap around. And it's just nice to see, because he always had the ability to land on guys, but he never really did try to sit down. And I feel like if this version of Max fought Calvin Kattar when Max did, I think Max knocks him out. Because back then he wasn't ever focused on power. He was just trying to hit you as many times as he could. That's not really the case anymore. So in their second fight, the biggest discrepancy for me was their power and size, obviously, right? But when Max Holloway would crack Poirier, aside from the knee, and I believe it was round 4, if I remember correctly, but when Max would crack Dustin, it was like, it didn't affect him all that much, okay? When Dustin Poirier would crack Max Holloway, he was getting ragdolled from just the force from a punch would send Max like 4 steps in the other direction. Now I don't know that that's going to be the case, because he has bulked up, right? So he's got a stronger base. He's going to be more filled out. He's probably, the weight discrepancy is not going to be as big. And then also when Max cracks Dustin, so to me the power differential is not going to be as big as it was the first time. And the size discrepancy is not going to be as big as it was the first time. So Max has kind of closed that gap in a couple senses. And also, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like Max has added more shit to his game and probably improved more than Dustin Poirier has since that day. So I'm having a very hard time not picking Max Holloway, because I want Dustin Poirier to win, dude. I want him to get the perfect fucking retirement, you know. But I think I'm gonna pick Max Holloway by decision, and then that way I won't be disappointed if I'm wrong. But if I'm correct, I can just be correct. Okay, so fuck it, dude. I'll be live streaming that event as I usually do. Okay, so if you want to come check that out, do so. Like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. I'll see you at the next video. Bye bye.